Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the very first #1 episode of the NFL Gridiron Flex. This is your boy Cool McCain. I'll be your guide on this smooth ride tonight as we discuss some previews for the AFC West. It's a big night, lots of things happening. For those who are professional wrestling aficionados, probably checking out SmackDown because of everything that's went down this week, and I get it. But hey, the replays are available, so make sure you tune in. Make sure you get my thoughts on the AFC and what we're gonna have popping off. So we'll start here by simply saying this: welcome, glad you're here. Everybody that shows up, everybody that checks out the replay. New shows, we know how it goes, right? First couple of weeks, everybody's like, is this really gonna be something I want to see? Or is this just, for lack of a better word, a little mess has been thrown together? We're not doing this. And if you've seen this face before, you know how. But to get things started, just a couple of things we want to talk about here. So first, got our first comment here, Coach Dante. What's good, Coach Dante? Appreciate you checking in with us. Just want to start by saying, man, really excited. This is another opportunity to talk NFL. The show will be rocking all season. So every week of the season, you can always see this good information here on this particular broadcast. Now, what we're going to talk about, I'm get straight into it. Meat and potatoes. This week I'm solo, so it's not going to take as long as it could. But we're going to talk about the AFC. Quick review of what happened with the different divisions last year, where everyone finished, and also where I see everyone finishing this year. So we're going to start with the North, right? So AFC North. For those of y'all who may not have been aware, last year AFC North, Cincinnati Bengals 12-4. Obviously had a situation where they didn't get that last game in. The Ravens finished second at 10-7. The Pittsburgh Steelers finished third at 9-8. And then the Cleveland Browns finished last in that division at 7-10. So this division, I think, is one of the more interesting ones. Obviously, Cincinnati Bengals is a team who are a playoff contender most of the years, even though they could have had a little bit better play from the offensive line. Great wide receivers, I think. I think one of the better trios in the league. They solid running game. Mixon's a solid back. I don't think they use him enough because of all of the aerial escapades that they kind of pop out there. But yeah. But I don't see a reason that the Cincinnati Bengals will not be on top of the AFC North again in the coming season. So that's definitely the team I'm looking at and saying they're going to make something happen. Where the question mark comes in is once you get past that position. You had Baltimore at 10-7, Steelers at 98, Browns at 7-10, right? So I know we can look at schedules, we can break down every game, but I'm going to do this kind of more off of the overall totality of how I feel. Not worried about records for me. It's more about placement, right? So when I look at the teams, I think Baltimore did improve, right? A lot of changes happened with Baltimore. We can go through some of those changes. Obviously you brought in some guys on offense and Odell Beckham Jr. It's a guy that's going to help this team out quite a bit. If he can be the guy that he was prior to that injury, when he was playing with the Rams, because we haven't seen him play since that injury. So if he can be that guy, then that's going to be a definite upgrade for them. Obviously, they're counting on Rashad Bateman to stay healthy and play a good role for that team this year. And then also Zay Flowers, right? As a guy who's done a lot in the preseason, looked really well, rookie. He's kind of come in and taken over as that slot guy. Behind them, you have Devin Duvernay, who's a guy I think that, if needed, can be that fourth wide receiver and 4 wide receiver sets. Guys had a little bit of experience. Pretty solid guy. I've had him in fantasy before, and he's put up, decent numbers, right? Especially bye-week fill-in. Got Nelson Aguilar after that. I'm an Eagles fan, so we know how I feel about Nelson Aguilar, but he's been a lot better since he's been away from Philadelphia. And then third on the depth chart, Well, second on the depth chart or third for the second group would be Tylan Wallace, who is the backup slot wide receiver. So a solid, I think, group. I mean, whenever you talk about the Ravens offense, you have to make sure you mention Mark Andrews, right? This guy's all world tight end. So much going on with him. A really good player, and Isaiah Likely is backup. Running back, you got J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, Melvin Gordon III, all guys I think have a good shot of making their roster. I mean, depth is important. I think these are all guys that can go. And that's really important because, you never know when injuries are going to hit. And it's a team that does employ fullbacks as well. So they have that guys that they have sometimes to make that extra block to get those guys open. Not going to take the time to really go over the defense for the Ravens because we all are aware of that. The Ravens always have a solid defense. They're a team that always does what needs to happen. All right, we got Sam in the comments. He says, "What's up, Coach?" To Coach Dante. What's up, Sam? Appreciate you tuning in as well. And then we'll move on here to who I think will be third. I'm thinking the Ravens are going to stay second because I think that they're going to be. Well, let me say this: the Ravens are going to finish second or third in this division. They're not going to finish last. And I say second or third because I think I talked about the other team that I think is going to finish there. So I think the Steelers are going to be fourth this year. The Steelers, I think, have improved, but if you look around, the Browns are going to be better because they're going to have a guy who was a MVP caliber candidate, right? A guy who was a really great quarterback, had been out of football, came back next year, got his feet wet. Deshaun Watson had a couple of games to kind of get himself together, get back into the flow of football. I think this year we're going to see him start to trend back towards the level he was prior to injury. And I think that team is going to end up finishing in third place. And the Steelers, I think, are going to stay around where they were last year. But I think they're going to be that last team in the division by maybe a game or a tiebreaker. So that's where I kind of see the AFC North. I see them having at least two teams in the playoffs. Whoever finished second, I believe, will have a good opportunity to make the playoffs as well. And like I said, I see that being the Ravens as we sit right now. And that's with a couple of caveats. Number one, if Lamar Jackson can stay healthy. Number two, if those weapons are utilized properly. And if the new offensive coordinator for them is going to give him the opportunity to use more than just his legs, to really use his arm and really be that versatile quarterback. Because as we can see from teams who kind of have that, and that offensive coordinator is Todd Monken, for those who may not be aware. But I think he's a guy that's going to give them the opportunity and let Lamar Jackson be Lamar Jackson, right? The versatility is very paramount. When you're a quarterback who can run the ball as well as throw the ball and do both with great accuracy and both with great intent and kind of read the defense as well, put the ball where it needs to go, and keep defensive guessing, you make your teams a lot better. So I believe all those things are going to happen. That's going to put them, I believe, in second, possibly third. Browns are the other team I see in that 2 to 3 range. And I see the Steelers, Kenny Pickett probably taking a step forward. They've got some good weapons in Pickens and Deontay Johnson, running back. They got some guys there. No need to go into all the details. You guys have probably heard this 1,000 times, but just kind of giving you my take on it. But I think the Steelers will be last, but it'll be a respectable last. I think this is a division where all of the teams are going to win at least 9 games to me. So I think everyone's going to be over 500. So we'll move on here to the AFC South. So a lot's been said about the AFC South. It's the weakest division in the AFC, which is probably, unfortunately, true because I think every other team I feel has 2 strong candidates to make the playoffs. They may not, but at least they have 2 strong candidates. But I think the South really has one. And a lot of people think it's going to be Jacksonville, who was first last year at 9-8. The Titans were second place at 7-10. The Colts were 4-12, and then the Texans were 3-13. So we'll do this one in reverse order. The Texans, 3-13 last year, are going to improve on that record. I think the Texans are going to be the 3rd best team in this division next year. in a very tight battle with the Titans and possibly even the Jaguars, depending on the development of CJ Stroud. We could go into detail about CJ Stroud, the weapons that he has, the defense that the Texans are going to have under a great defensive head coach. But I think the biggest thing is going to be the other teams in the division, right? The Colts, to me, are going to be a very bad team. So a lot of people were talking about Richardson and how he played against the Eagles last night. Richardson didn't see any starters. Richardson saw very few second team guys on the Eagles and still had under 50% completion. Is that a guy that you feel like is going to be good for you? Maybe you do. If you're an Anthony Richardson believer, then hey, maybe this is something great for you and you feel like that's going to give him momentum to go into the season. But I do have news for you, Colts fans, Colts organization, anyone who's touting and playing that one great play that he had. We did a little fly Eagles fly thing. Luckily for Anthony Richardson, the Colts will not play the Eagles this year because the Colts are not going to make the playoffs. I think the Colts are going to be in contention for a top 3, if not the number 1 overall pick. And they're going to be a really bad organization. They're going to lose Jonathan Taylor, who up until last year when he was injured was a big part of the possible success they had, at least being a solid team. 4-12 last year. I think 4 wins is more than they're going to have this coming season. So I think they're definitely the bottom. I think the Texans flip-flop, and I think they get around 7-8 wins this year because I believe by the time we get a couple of games into the season, Stroud's going to get his legs. He has some versatility. He's a guy that I see as a guy who can throw the ball, but also can run when necessary. So I wouldn't call him a dual threat because a dual threat guy to me is a guy that's more split. He's more like 45, 55, 60, 40. I think Stroud's more like 80-20, right? 80% a passer, but 20% can run, move around the pocket, those type of things. So I think he's the guy that's going to not have as big of a development window because he's had a really strong receiver before. He's read defenses before in college. I know there's a big stigma on quarterbacks from Ohio State, but Stroud is going to help change that, just as Justin Fields is going to continue to do that as well. I mean, it's not necessarily where you go these days, in my opinion, but how you're coached and how you develop. Because once you hit the league, the thing is you have to develop yourself. You have to go out and seek quarterback gurus, quarterback coaches, guys that can be advisors to you, help you past quarterbacks, like a lot of the quarterbacks that are starting to be successful have done to get that extra the extra level to help yourself improve. I believe Stroud's one of the guys that's going to do that. So Sam says, sorry, I'll be on. My kids weren't awake. He's sorry. Oh, no need to be sorry, Sam. This is nothing, buddy. This is just a little talk with everybody tonight. All right. And then we have the Titans. They were 7-10 last year. I think they're going to be somewhere around it, maybe a game or so better. I think the Texans will challenge them for that second spot and make them have to play hard. But I think the addition of DeAndre Hopkins is vastly overlooked, right? I think a lot of people are just looking at it on the surface level, right? To say, oh, DeAndre Hopkins, he's not the same player that he was. How much is he going to do for Tennessee? How much is he going to help Tennessee? He's not really going to help them a lot, blah, blah, blah. See, here's where DeAndre Hopkins plays a big part for this team. I'm talking about this because it's a big move. We're not going to go into detail on every team because we don't need to, right? But for DeAndre Hopkins, here's the thing. He allows Treylon Burks to move to the second receiver. So he's not covered by number 1 receivers anymore. Nikhil Westbrook-Ikhine, he now is able to be the slot receiver, right? So now you have those guys in better lineups. Now, the offensive line leaves a little bit to be desired, not the best, but hey, Ryan Tannehill's made it work. Then you look at running back. You've always got Derrick Henry. Tyjae Spears is a guy who's looked really good. Jonathan Ward's another guy they have on that roster, and Hassan Haskins. So they have some guys who can run the ball, be a little different from Derrick Henry, and hopefully keep Derrick Henry as healthy as they can this upcoming season. Now, here's where things get interesting for me. The quarterback position. Because we heard all last season that Malik Willis was, so bad and that they wanted to cut him or trade him this offseason. And lo and behold, guess who's second on the depth chart behind Ryan Tannehill? It's not Will Levis, who should never have been picked in the second round. and I think was a major oversight by Tennessee to pick him. But aforementioned Malik Willis, went with an offseason with training, development, film room, going again and getting those guys to help you, that quarterback coach, reaching out possibly to former quarterbacks and getting some workouts and things in, doing the things on your own end to help yourself get better seems to have worked for Malik Willis. And of course, Ryan Tannehill, the starter. We're not going to go a lot into the defenses here. And the reason for that is all these defenses, I feel like, except for the top two or three, they have weaknesses, they have strengths, right? The top defenses have a lot more strengths than weaknesses, but for the most part, defense is what it is. You can make a couple of changes. You may can find some guys that you feel like would be good in your scheme. They may end up getting cut, but for the most part, you know, can't do a lot with the defensive side. But I think that DeAndre Hopkins mentoring, right? Traylon Burks is a guy I believe can be a number one in this league in a couple of years, but you asked him to come in as a rookie with not the best quarterback situation. A lot of things going on, bad general manager at the time, and several things happening, and you wanted him to be a number one with no one to help him. You bring in a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, automatically, he's a leader in that position room. So when the coaches are not there, or when the coach is not being heard, DeAndre Hopkins can walk up to the front of the room and say, listen, guys, this is what needs to happen. DeAndre Hopkins can be an example in practice, in the weight room, off the field, right? A guy that you could talk to confidently, a guy that can help you with all the things that come with being an NFL player. And he's there now. He's going to be there. Traylon Burks is going to be able to pick his brain. So is Westbrook Ikhine. So you're going to give those guys something that they haven't had before. That's going to be, I think, very beneficial to them. Again, you still have Ryan Tannehill as your quarterback. So I'm not saying that he will have a 1,500-yard season and be like one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, but I think he will have long-term impact on the Titans, and that's going to help them be a better team, overall. So I do have them in second. And then obviously number one, I've got Sunshine and the Titans. No, I'm just kidding. I've got the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Jacksonville has a solid head coach in Doug Peterson. He's a Super Bowl winning coach with the Philadelphia Eagles. He's always really good with young quarterbacks, right? That's his thing. He's kind of in that niche, and this is a young quarterback. So I think Trevor Lawrence definitely took some steps forward last year under him. Travis Etienne still there. Tank Bigsby, JaMychal Hasty. These are all guys that we know. Even Dearness Johnson, a guy who played real well behind Cleveland's line, but maybe Cleveland just has a really good run line. That's something we'll find out this year. Evan Ingram at tight end. Big acquisition for them. Calvin Ridley. You pair him with Zay Jones and Christian Kirk. You've got a pretty solid wide receiver group there. Like a lot of teams, the backups, you don't really know too much, but they have their time to shine when they get on the field and show you who they are. But I think that Calvin Ridley is going to be a great add for them. I think he's a guy that's going to be hungry. He's missed football because of things that happened, but hey, things happen to everybody. It's time for a comeback here. There's a lot of reports that he's been looking really good in the offseason, in training camp, practices, in the preseason time that he's played. So a pretty good, strong connection through him and Trevor Lawrence from what I'm hearing. So it's good. I think he's a true number one. No question about that. And getting him there is going to, again, make everybody else not see the top things, not be schemed for, because I feel like you're going to be scheming for Calvin Ridley. And that's something that's going to be really exciting for this Jacksonville Jaguars team to add. Defensively, again, strong points, weak points, but it's a defense that can hold up. It's a defense that's going to help them win this division. So got two of the divisions knocked out. So got two more to go. All right, so then we'll move on. So the next one we'll cover is going to be the AFC East. Guys, I think we can all agree that the East in the NFC and AFC is the best division on paper so far, with the challenge in the AFC being the North, because the North could be pretty strong as well. But AFC's Buffalo Bills 13-3. We know why they're 13-3. The situation with DeMar Hamlin. Miami Dolphins 9-8, second place. New England Patriots 8-9, third place, and the Jets 7-10. closing out and rounding out the bottom. So at 13-3 Buffalo Bills. I think the Bills still win the division this coming season, but the gap closes. The big thing with them is what's going to happen with Josh Allen. Josh Allen did not look like the same quarterback, last year with Dayball gone to take over as a head coach with the Giants. So that's something to kind of watch and say, well, who is Josh Allen? I think the big problem is Josh Allen has fallen into the same track a lot of mobile quarterbacks fall into, and that's running the ball too much, not going through all your progressions and relying on your athletic ability and not hanging in that pocket and making the throws and keeping your eyes down the field at all times. I'm not saying that he can't do it, that he doesn't have the skill, but I'm just saying kind of falling into that. Um, Receiver room, you know, it's you've got one dog there in Stephon Diggs for sure. Then you've got Gabe Davis and Trent Sherfield from Miami. So those are three guys that there's a little bit of a drop off, I would definitely say, from Diggs to the other two. But those are guys that can play. If I'm Stephon Diggs, I definitely am complaining and attempting to get another guy in there, or at least, threatening like, hey, if y'all don't want to get me the help, then let me go somewhere else where I've got help. I mean, I think you look at this team receiving wise, Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid are going to be expected to kind of be the tight ends that can catch the ball and help Josh Allen as well. And I think they're doing something really smart this season, hopefully, from what I've been reading and what I've been hearing. And that's they're getting guys at the running back position that can help them have a committee. James Cook is number one on the depth chart right now. Damian Harris, free agent from New England. Then Latavius Murray, who's been on multiple teams, but has always played well when called upon, is the third string running back. So you've got a nice trio there of running backs. I think you need them to step up. You need them to play so that Josh Allen doesn't have to run as much. He can kind of not have to sacrifice his body, not take those hits, but do what he needs to do from his end, which is play the quarterback position, run the offense, get better, and just develop himself. Right? Ken Dorsey, questionable so far, incomplete as an OC, but he's going to have to get on the same page with Josh Allen, make sure the ball's getting to Diggs when it needs to, get some different things worked into that offense to give Diggs more opportunities to get touches, whether it's moving around some, maybe he doesn't always play on the right side. Maybe get him in the slot sometime for receiver sets, get him with some screens. Just find ways to get a guy like Stephon Diggs the ball enough where he's happy and where he's able to make plays to make the team better as well. And I think that's the balancing act that offensive coordinators need to work on being good at doing. There's two things. There's getting a guy the ball because he's your number one and you want to be happy. And it's also doing it in ways that helps the team. If Diggs is getting short plays, long plays, if he's being featured, but he's moving around, it's hard to keep up with him unless you're going to have one guy just shadow him, which is going to open up for the tight ends, which is going to open up for your other receivers. So Ken Dorsey, a little bit of quick game that hopefully you can use. Defensively, again, it's a team that's pretty solid defensively. Not as great as we've seen in this past season, even though they weren't horrible, but they did upgrade safeties. I don't talk about defense much just because, like I said, most teams, they're keeping a lot of the same pieces and just making a few changes. But I think they did do some good upgrades at safety. Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, those are good additions. Daquan Jones as well. So they brought in some guys. Von Miller's on the pup to start the season. But I think this is a team that can still repeat and be the team, in that division, and they can be the guys that are always going to be on top, at least for now. But it all depends on Josh Allen, if they can keep Stephon Diggs, if they can get this offense rolling in the correct direction and get that defense being dominant as possible. All right, so next up, got the Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins have two studs at wide receiver. Tight end is a question mark for them because they did use Mike Gesicki. But when you really look at this team, whoever you have at running back, whether they go out and get a guy like Jonathan Taylor, whatever they do, there's one thing that's for sure about this team and two things that's for certain about this team. Tua Tagovailoa is the difference maker. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill need somebody to throw the ball. Right, Cedric Wilson's there, Braxton Berrios, River Craft, Robbie Chosen, all guys that you've probably heard of before. Excuse me, in college and the pros. We look right now in the running back room. Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr., Devin Akane, and Salvin Ahmed are their top four guys. Obviously, Mostert and Wilson are guys that the head coach Mike McDaniel knows very well because he was their OC when they were in San Francisco. So he's brought in some guys he knows. Strong DC and Vic Fangio, Frank Smith. We'll see. We'll see if he has more of a say, because I feel like last year Frank Smith was kind of like the OC that was the OC, but a lot of things were being handled by Mike McDaniel. So hopefully he at least allows his OC to be a little bit bigger part of things this year as far as play calling, as far as game planning, because I find that the guys that are able to turn it over at least parts of those duties seem to do better as an overall head coach, because you don't have the stress of attempting to be a play caller like an OC while being a head coach. Mike White is I think more than capable. Let me say this right. I always do this, y'all. Mike White. It just always happens, man. But Mike White, I think he's a great story last year from the Jets. He'll be the backup. So if Tua does miss time, you have a guy in Mike White that you could look at and say, man, this is a guy that can play. This is a guy who's going to make some things happen. And this is a guy that I'm going to love seeing throughout the season. Right? He needs to play. He can play. Backup quarterback is one of the most popular positions on the team. Fans love the backup quarterback all the time. When you've got one that's a really good player in case something happens to your starter, you're in a solid situation. And I think Miami, if he can stay healthy, they're the second team there, and they're definitely a playoff team in my opinion as well. Third, last year, you have the 8-9 New England Patriots. The New England Patriots are going to fall off a cliff this year. New England Patriots are not a very good team. And the reason being is I don't think they have a solid quarterback. I don't think they have a good wide receiver group. So if you don't have in my opinion, you don't have a top 15 quarterback and you don't have a top 15 wide receiver group, you're not going to put a lot of points up that way. Now, people may argue, they do have Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki at tight end. Okay, there's some guys that can make plays, but they're tight ends. You still need a guy at the wide receiver position that can make all the catches for you, right? And they just don't have that. Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi, even Trace McSorley. Personally speaking, none of those guys really impress me. Mac Jones isn't horrible, but he's just average, right? He's just average. You have to put a great team around him. And, Gesicki and Hunter Henry may be some pieces because he's probably going to have a lot of dump-off plays and short throws to the tight ends and running backs and Ramondre Stevenson, Ezekiel Elliott, and Ty Montgomery. But the true test, the realness is the wide receiver group they have is Devontae Parker, Tyquan Thornton, and Juju Smith-Schuster. I have not been impressed with either of those guys, right? Juju could be decent because he'd be able to maybe play off Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. Tyquan Thornton, we'll see. Second-year guy, so we'll see. Devontae Parker, he's probably not even going to stay on the field, right? He just hasn't been one of those guys who's been able to stay on the field. If he can, maybe puts together a solid season. But in case Devontae Parker gets hurt, you got Kendrick Bourne as a backup for him. Then you've got Keyshawn Boutte as a backup for Tyquan Thornton, and Demario Douglas as the second stringer behind Juju Smith-Schuster. Like I said, not a horrible group, but I think just an average group, right? Probably somewhere between like 20, 22 maybe, something like that, as far as wide receiver trios go. And it's just, and then you have a quarterback who's in that same range. You got two really good tight ends, but do they offset all that? In my opinion, no. Ezekiel Elliott would be a good pickup for this team because he'll give them a second guy who could be a short yardage back, who veteran, of course. And I think he still has something left in the tank, just not as a starter. I think this position as a second stringer is perfect for Ezekiel Elliott. I think he'll thrive in that role for them. I don't know what that looks like for this team based on how they would play, but I think he'll have a chance to have a really solid season if he can get on the same page as B.O.B. or Billy O'Brien and Bill Belichick. But they're definitely going to be at the bottom of this division, unfortunately. It's just going to happen. All right. And then who I have in third place and possibly making the playoffs, maybe in second place, depending on if Tua stays healthy or not, is the New York Jets. So a lot of people want to say, oh, the Jets, just because they add Aaron Rodgers, that doesn't mean that they're going to make the playoffs. You're right. It doesn't just because they add Aaron Rodgers, it doesn't mean that they're going to make the playoffs. But thankfully, they didn't just add Aaron Rodgers. They didn't come back with the same exact team as last year and just place Aaron Rodgers on it, right? They went out and got Alan Lazard, a guy that Aaron Rodgers loves, McCole Hartman, a guy with a lot of speed. Doesn't make all the catches, but if you got a guy like Aaron Rodgers throwing you the ball, and you can't, when the ball's placed nicely for you, you can't make those catches. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen with where he was at before in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes. But I'm just saying Aaron Rodgers is a vet at this. He's been doing this longer than Mahomes. If you can't get the balls where he's throwing them where you like them at or where you have the best opportunity to catch them, then you may not hang on anywhere in the NFL. Then, of course, Corey Davis news. Corey Davis ended up retiring. As I believe it was yesterday, maybe the day before. Days running a little bit together for me the last few days. A lot going on. But he announced that he's retiring. So Garrett Wilson slides in as the receiver there. Randall Cobb is on the second string along with Malik Taylor and Irvin Charles, excuse me. But tight end, Tyler Conklin, CJ Uzoma, those are two guys that, pretty good. Neither one of those are, 1,000-yard receivers or guys that are going to put up big plays, but both of those guys can block for you. Zuma's probably a little bit better offensively as far as catching the ball. Conklin's maybe a little bit better of a blocker, but I think both guys can catch. Rodgers should make a big difference on this team, as well as Breece Hall, the big addition of Dalvin Cook. And people may laugh when I say big addition, but Dalvin Cook brings explosiveness still. I think he's near to the end of his prime in the beginning, but I think he's still there. I think his foot's still firmly entrenched in it. He hasn't declined yet. But I think Minnesota made a misjudgment and decided that he was done before he was actually done and got rid of him because of this new wave of running backs don't really matter, it feels like. So I think Dalvin Cook is going to be used very well as a second back there. Breece Hall somehow can't go, gets hurt, or needs to take a game off, or you don't want to overuse him to start the season. Dalvin can definitely take some carries. And you've got Michael Carter behind them, who I believe averaged 4 yards, if I was looking at the stats correctly, last year when he did play, but just isn't the talent of Dalvin Cook or Breece Hall. So, I mean, when you have two guys more talented than you in front of you, one guy a veteran is still in that prime, I mean, these things happen, but it doesn't mean that he won't have a role. There's a lot of teams that use their second and third running backs quite often, especially you don't want to overuse Breece Hall to start the season or even throughout the season. So I think this is an opportunity for them to keep their backs fresh, be able to hit holes, and kind of have all three of those guys have games or times where they're running the ball really well. Offensive line is definitely a problem, a huge concern, but you got Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully he can make that line somewhat better because he'll be able to make better decisions, maybe call audibles to kind of put guys in positions if he sees things out of place so that this team looks better than it did last year. So, yeah, I believe the Jets are going to be a playoff team as well. I think we're going to get 3 playoff teams out of the NFC East, when we go over them, as well as this AFC East. Well, the East is the dominant region in the AFC and NFC. And lastly, we're going to go to the easiest division to pick number 1 and number 2 in, and that's going to be the AFC West. So last year we had the Chiefs at 14-3. We had the Chargers at 10-7. We had the Raiders at 6-11, and the Broncos at 5-12. So we're rotating, so we'll start at the bottom. Denver Broncos were 5-12 last year. Really, really embarrassing year for Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, I think, is a really good quarterback. I think the system was not fit for him. And if you take a guy and put him in a system that doesn't work for him, you're going to get what you saw out of him last year. I also think that Russell Wilson could have done more to try to mitigate the gap, right? And I don't think that was done to the extent that it could have been done. So they have some injuries at wide receiver. So now they have Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and Jerry Jeudy as their starting receivers. They have Marquez Callaway, who you may remember from New Orleans, as one of their backups in case someone else, gets hurt or misses time. Brandon Johnson and Kendall Hinton. Tight end, We got Greg Dulcich and Adam Troutman. Those are guys that are more blockers. You can leak out for passes sometimes, but at least up until this point, these aren't guys that you're looking at like, man, this guy is really gonna, make a big difference in that part of the game. Now, of course, people develop, people grow, so we can see more from them this year. Um, Offensive line wise, I think Denver went and spend some money to be better. We'll see if that pans out or not. I know a lot of 49ers fans really glad that they took Mike McGlinchey, but maybe a different system, under Joe Lombardi. Maybe he learns, maybe he becomes a better player. Sean Payton's now the head coach here. I don't see this team being the worst team this year. I don't see them being the best. I don't see them being in the top two, but they're not going to be the worst team. I think the Denver Broncos are going to finish third this upcoming season. They could find a way to slide in the second if they win some games that I don't anticipate them winning, but that's why you play them. But if I'm looking right now, I'm thinking Broncos third, possibility of second. Unfortunately, you're in a division where it's going to be hard to win it for the next over handful of years, probably 10 years plus, with Pat Mahomes in this division as well. But I think this is a solid team, better than last year. They won't be an embarrassment, and they'll start that climb of seeing if they can get the solid play that they should out of Russell Wilson, and they'll be fine because behind him you have Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci. And I'm going to tell you, you don't want either one of those guys having to get in and take major steps for you. If you see those guys, you want to be because you're winning big or the game's just out of hand and you're just saving Russell Wilson. But yeah, I think they're going to finish third this year, not fourth as they did the previous season. The Raiders, they're going to finish last. We're not going to mince words here. The Raiders are, it's tough to be the Raiders right now, right? It's tough to be the Raiders. I mean, head coach wise, it's not happening. Talent wise, your best tight end is gone, right? So you're starting wide receivers here, right? Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and Hunter Renfrow. It's not a bad lineup, but clearly Devontae Adams is the elite guy in this group. He came to play with his best friend, and now his best friend's gone. And in his place, who did the Raiders bring in? Josh McDaniels gets Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo was good in the system he was in. And there's really nothing more I need to say about that. Brian Hoyer is his backup. Ain't no Connell's the third stringer. Josh Jacobs did finish practice. Not sure what's happening with him contract-wise and different things, so we'll see how that works out. Behind him, there's Zamir White and Amir Abdullah. If for some reason he starts the season and Reporter doesn't get the contract situation completely straightened out before then. This is a defense that they made some changes, but they needed a lot of work based on what they did last year. They let down their quarterback to the point where he was crying at some point during the season because of how bad guys were playing. And other guys were echoing that sentiment as well. Yeah, you got to miss your tight end, man. It's hard to lose arguably top 5, definitely top 10 tight end and not really have a guy in replacement. You're hoping Austin Hooper is that guy and Michael Mayer. And they may be, but we'll see if they can even jointly replace the production, right? Because he's a guy that could take, plays away. You had to game plan for him as well. He's another guy you had to look at and say, this is a guy that can make plays. And you don't have him there any longer. So that's going to be very tough for you. And I'd hate to be the GM that allowed these things to happen. I really hate to be him. Boy, this got to be tough. It's got to be tough. Darren Waller is no longer with your team. Darren Waller. It's tough. All right. Then we have, of course, the Chargers. I think they'll finish in the same place they did last season, second, only because the Chiefs are number 1, right? Could the Broncos possibly get past the Chargers? It's a very, 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 very light probability. I mean, I guess anything is possible, but very light probability that will actually happen. Chargers, they're a team that they just haven't been able to put it together, right? They've had talent for years, injuries, and wide receiver's been a part of it. But I mean, you look at this group like on paper, you're not thinking about different injuries, things like that, but just looking at this group on paper, this is a really good looking team. This is a team that should be able to make some things happen. But when you see them go out and play, they just have such a hard time putting together a solid season. Like they'll have moments where they look great. They'll have games where they look great. Maybe Kellen Moore is the answer. Maybe Brandon Staley just needed a different voice at um, offensive coordinator, and Kellen Moore will be able to get the most out of these schools. But I think when you're looking at it, it's a couple of things to remember. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen are very injury prone. Quentin Johnson, their first round pick, is probably going to step in and be their other receiver. Then you've got guys like Jalen Guyton, Joshua Palmer, that can do some things here as well as Darius Davis, fourth round pick this past year. So, excuse me, these are guys that are stepping up and showing you a little bit. Running back, you always got Austin Eckler, Swiss Army knife, Joshua Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, and then round out the top four, Elijah Dotson. So that's what you got there. We know what they have at quarterback, Justin Herbert. He's a tough guy. He plays through injury, had a rib injury last year. He just has yet to really meet, to me, he gets the ranking, and I get it because of the stats, but we got to get into the playoffs and get some wins and, make some noise before you start to get really anointed as one of the better quarterbacks. In my opinion, you don't have to win a Super Bowl every year, but, make some progression as far as what you do in the playoffs. And I think that's where we're going to see what Justin Herbert's going to be able to do this year. Gerald Everett is going to be their tight end 1 from Seattle. Donald Parham is going to be the tight end 2, it looks like, and then Trey McKinney, number 3. These are guys that could all see some time, because the thing with a guy like Justin Herbert, he's going to sling the ball. Now, I say that they don't run, but a big part of what Eckler does is out of the backfield as well. So I think he's going to sling the ball. All those guys, when they're in the game, are going to have opportunities, because there's so many guys that you have to guard with this offense. It's so explosive on paper, that you have to guard all these guys. But once we get in game situations, we will see how those things do work out. And lastly, but of course not least, a team who definitely will be in the playoffs. If they're not in the playoffs, that's the most shocking storyline of the season. And that's the Kansas City Chiefs' new offensive coordinator, Matt Nagy. And they've got a good defensive coordinator, actually, too, is Steve Spagnuolo. So 2 guys do really well on their sides of the ball. Question for Kansas City: Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, and Sky Moore. Are those going to be number 1s? Behind them, you got Justin Watson, Rashee Rice, and Richie James. So some guys that you may have heard of, either from opportunities like Richie James from last season with the Giants, where there wasn't a lot there, second-round pick Rashee Rice, or Justin Watson, who was there last year. So, some things there. You look at tight end, we know it's Travis Kelce. Noah Gray's behind him. Maybe he gets a few targets this year. Mahomes has Blaine Gabbert, so he's got another guy that's kind of been around a little bit, but hasn't necessarily been very successful, but can be a good backup if needed in the right system, and this is probably the right system. Running back, you got Pacheco as the starter, Jerick McKinnon as the primary backup, and then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, their old starter, is now the third string running back. So that's interesting. He's another guy if you're looking for a running back that may be available for maybe 7th round pick or whatever. Right? Isaiah Simmons got traded for 1, so it's crazy. But I think they just have Mahomes. They're going to have a solid defense, of course. The one thing they have is a big holdout situation that they need to get straightened out in Chris Jones. But other than that, I mean, they don't have to be the best defense, because they have a really strong, a really good offense. And they have a good system that works, and they find players that fit that system. It may not be the names that we think it's going to be, but they find guys that work. So Mahomes is going to help it a lot. I think Pacheco is another one of those guys that's going to be a dual threat. You're not going to ask him to just run the ball. You're going to expect him to catch the ball in the backfield, do some of those things. McKinnon as well, if he can stay healthy. You still have Edwards-Helaire as of now, We'll see if he's a guy that hangs around long term, or if someone else decides that they want to bring him into their organization. But what I will say, guys, is that it's been fun going over the AFC with you. Enjoyed it. It's a fun thing, just talk football, man. Get a chance to obviously, who I'm a fan of, but just to talk football, man. Give some opinions on what's happening in football for the upcoming season. And first episode of Gridiron Flex, I think it was a good one. Everybody who sees this later on, just make sure you hop in the comments. Give your thoughts. Give us a like, give us a follow, give us a share it on the different places that we have. And man, we'll be back next week for another episode of the NFL Gridiron Flex. Signing out. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys. And see you back next week, 9 p.m. EST.